Greetings, humans! Welcome back to Sci-Fi Punks, where we like to talk all things sci-fi, movies, comics, video games, novels. If it's sci-fi, I like it, I want to talk about it. And today, I want to review a book that I read a couple times called Ready Player One, first published in 2011 by Ernest Cline. It was a big deal when it came out. It eventually even had a Steven Spielberg film adaptation of it that was released, I think, in 2018. And yeah, it was a big deal. It was a popular novel, but I want to use it as a jumping off point to discuss more broadly a phenomenon that I've kind of noticed that occurs in pop culture sometimes, where we sometimes collectively change our opinion on a piece of media after a while. I mean, this happens a lot. Like, sometimes something will come out, like the Star Wars prequels or Nickelback, where the critics hate it. Like, it's just widely considered lowbrow or stupid or poorly made. And then the years go on and people start to develop a appreciation for it, and it gets more love as the years go on. It gains a cult following. And I don't want to throw any shade on people that like Nickelback or the Star Wars prequels now. Like, I think Nickelback is stupid music for dumb people, but I also like, three-chord punk rock like the Misfits that make songs about zombies and stuff, so I'm not one to talk. We're all allowed to like stupid shit. So you see that happen a lot, where something comes out and we all decide it's bad, and then as the years go on, we kind of decide it's good after a while. And then the opposite happens as well. Something gets released and it's very popular and considered, it's critically praised for whatever reasons, and then as the years go on, it ages poorly. The movie Ace Ventura: Pet Detective when it first came out, it was a big deal. I remember I was a 90s kid. Everyone loved those movies, and now a lot of people kind of find that film to be pretty offensive, and it hasn't really aged well, quote unquote. Another really obvious example that I'm sure a lot of you people are thinking is Harry Potter, where, Harry Potter was beloved by everybody when it first was released. And now J.K. Rowling has pissed off much of her fan base. And whether you agree with her or not, you have to admit that she has alienated a large chunk of her following. Now a lot of people don't like Harry Potter anymore, or at least they try not to like Harry Potter anymore. That's a pretty interesting phenomenon in itself, where a fan base deliberately tries not to like something they used to like. That's interesting too. Sometimes things age poorly for more subtle reasons. It's not just that it's offensive or the creator pissed off a bunch of people. It's something deeper. Our culture has changed. The way that we experience culture has changed, and so the way that we perceive this once popular piece of content is different now. And I feel like that's the case when it comes to the novel Ready Player One. See, when Ready Player One first came out, it was a big deal. Everyone thought this book was awesome. I pull it off the shelf here, but I don't know. I think I let somebody borrow it. It's apparently missing. Anyways, but when it first came out, I loved it. I was on that train. I was like, yeah, this book is fantastic. And I wasn't alone. A lot of people loved Ready Player One, to the point where it got a movie made about it. But now, if you talk to a lot of science fiction aficionados, fans of the genre, about the book Ready Player One, a lot of the time the discourse around the book now is quite negative. A lot of science fiction fans think the book is fairly lowbrow and pretty stupid. And I was wondering where this came from, because for all I knew, it was a fantastic novel. I've read it twice now. I thought it was a lot of fun, but now it's come under a lot of fire and a lot of criticism, and I want to explain why that started to happen. After 10 years or so after it was first published, just people's opinions started to change about it. And it wasn't like the author Ernest Cline went and, murdered a bunch of children or something. It's just that the way our culture perceives what the themes of the novel are have changed. There's something about this novel that no longer resonates with people anymore. So Ready Player One, what's it about? Well, it's basically set in the future, 100 years or so, and overpopulation has decimated the planet, and everyone's really poor and everything sucks in the real world, but everyone has access to a virtual world now called the Oasis. They put a headset on and they completely immerse themselves into an online massive open world multiplayer game, essentially. It's basically the internet, but all virtual. Kind of like what Mark Zuckerberg was trying to do with that metaverse thing that never worked out. It's that, but apparently it works this time. So, the majority of people they spend a lot of time in the oasis. And our main character is this kid who, spends a lot of time there. His life sucks. He lives in this terrible trailer park where it's a bunch of trailers that are stacked on top of each other because there's just not enough space for people. And his life is horrible. So he spends most of his time in this oasis. As do most people. A lot of people work in the oasis, and that's where they make their money. A lot of life is just spent in this virtual world. The plot of the story is essentially that the creator of this oasis, the developer of this whole massive online world, has died, and he's like the richest man in the world, and he basically sends a message out to everybody saying, hey, I'm dead now, but somewhere in this virtual world, this giant expansive online world, exists my fortune. If you can find the hidden Easter egg somewhere in this world, if you follow the clues and you complete certain tasks, you will win my fortune. I won't tell you anything else. You just got to figure it out. But somewhere out there, you have access to my fortune. If you can find it, you'll become the owner of my company. You'll own the oasis. You'll basically, become the ruler of the world, essentially. And so the main character, who has a shitty life, basically tries to find this Easter egg, as well as many other people in the oasis, especially an evil corporation that wants to gain complete control of the oasis so they can completely corporatize the whole thing. The oasis is free for most people, or it's free for everybody, and it's basically what the internet was like when, like in the late 90s and the early 2000s, before everything went to shit. Basically, there's an evil corporation that wants to turn it into what the internet is like in our modern day, or in our present day, where everything is just covered in ads, everything is trying to sell you something. And so it's our heroes versus this evil corporation in a race to win this giant fortune, find this Easter egg. That's a cool plot. It's simple, it's very whimsical, it's very Spielbergian in its scope. And it makes for a really fun story. There's themes of identity, persona, online anonymity, social decay, isolation, but above all else, the main theme of the novel Ready Player One is nostalgia, because the creator of the Oasis was an 80s kid, and he loved the 80s so much that the Oasis is stuffed with 80s references. And this is obviously just because the author of the novel, Ernest Cline, was an 80s kid and loved Back to the Future and Star Wars and all of that stuff from the 80s, Nintendo and Atari. And so he just wanted an excuse to stuff his nostalgia into this novel. It was a very clever way of doing this. So the book is just full of nostalgic references to the 80s. The book is not even subtle about this at all. It is so overt with its references. It's basically just, there are times where it just lists you references from the 80s, just like literally in a list, comma after comma of an 80s reference. And this is where I feel a lot of the modern criticism of this novel comes from. You see, when this book was first published in the early 2010s, in 2011, nostalgia culture hadn't quite gotten old yet. Like, it was still exciting in the early 2000s to see Family Guy make a Star Wars reference. Like you'd see a reference to a movie you liked in something else and you would get stoked about it. But as the 2010s went on, this particular method of exciting people got really old. They just started doing it more and more, and there's just so much nostalgia bait in all of the media that we consume, where we all got sick of nostalgia. Like, we just got sick of hearing about the 80s and the 90s and seeing references to all of these old movies and all of this new media, that we kind of turned on nostalgia culture. And Ready Player One was written before people really started to feel this way. And I feel like a lot of people who read it now won't understand what this book is trying to do. It's not just making references for the sake of references. It's trying to say something with its references. The story of Ready Player One is a critique of nostalgia culture. I actually think the book is a little ahead of its time, because what it's doing is it is critiquing our love of nostalgia. It's exploring our fascination with the past, by making overt references to it. It basically uses high adventure storytelling to explore the nature of nostalgia in our culture and what it means for us to look into the past and to hold on to the past so deeply. And I think the book is really smart for this. I think it's a great choice, but a lot of people, when they read it now, all they see is a bunch of 80s references and think, oh yeah, this guy just wants to list off a bunch of references to movies he liked because he thinks that'll be fun and he thinks people will get stoked about that. So this book is cheap and lowbrow for that reason. And yeah, so that's the criticism I see a lot about this novel, is that it's just a bunch of stupid, cheap references to popular culture and it doesn't have any real substance. But my argument is that its cheap references to pop culture is what gives it its substance. Its substance is that it is exploring the nature of pop culture itself. And it can only do that by making references to real things in the real world. There's another novel that I don't like called Red Shirts by, what's the name of this guy? I have his other book here, John Scalzi. Scalzi, yeah. He wrote a book, it's not this one, but he wrote a book called Red Shirts that basically... it basically tries to critique the original Star Trek TV show and how it kills all the red shirt guys and treats death so cheaply, or how it treats character death so cheaply. And it's like criticism of that, but it doesn't actually reference Star Trek. It makes up its own version of Star Trek, and I hate this sort of thing. It's obviously trying to be Star Trek, but it just like won't go there. It might have been for copyright reasons or whatever, but it's so obvious that it kind of takes me out of the novel while I'm reading it. This like knockoff Star Trek that John Scalzi made up just to try to make a point. I don't know. Ready Player One doesn't do that though. It boldly just wears its references on its sleeves and says what it needs to say by using them just right in your face like that. The writing is fantastic. It's very snappy. It's very quick. You're not going to get bored reading this novel. It's very, very fun. It does sort of read like a young adult's novel at points, but the subject matter sometimes gets way too violent and intense to actually be a young adult's novel. So I guess I'll give it some criticism there that, yeah, it's kind of written in a form that is... Its writing style, its prose is a little juvenile at times, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. The book is just a lot of fun to read. What I'm basically trying to say is I feel like Ready Player One has been treated unfairly by modern critics. I think that the book is actually a very smart novel. It makes a really subtle point in a really non-subtle way, if you understand, if that even makes any sense. Anyways, this has been Sci-Fi Punks. All hail Megatron.